What would you do if you woke up and got a second chance to fix every mistake that ever destroyed the people you loved most? Not a dream, not a wish, but a real second chance with the same young body, the same frozen winter, and a clock ticking toward the exact moment your brother decides to end his life. This is the story of Fong Shiaan, a man who died an old man full of regret and came back as the reckless 20-something version of himself in 1980, Northeast China. He woke up to his sister-in-law calling his name, the same woman he had stood over at her grave more than 40 years later, sobbing until his body gave out. A brain hemorrhage had taken him mid-cry at the graves of people he had outlived only because he had been too useless to die alongside them. But now he was back inside the narrow house at Shuangma Ridge, and the calendar said it was 1980 again. His brother Deming was lying on the heated bed, skinny as a stripped branch, barely able to raise his voice above a whisper. Deming called him in to say what he believed were his final words, methodical and quiet, the way a man speaks when he has already made up his mind. He laid it out plainly. The job was gone, the money was gone. The girlfriend's father would never allow the marriage now. Then he said the one thing that split Shian's chest open. He was dying, and he needed Shian to promise to look after Yanfang and the children after he was gone. Shian already knew exactly what day this was. This was the day his brother had killed himself the first time round. After their parents died when Shian was 10 years old, Deming had taken him in without hesitation, raised him alongside his own family, poured every ounce of himself into keeping that household alive. And what had Shian given him in return? Drinking, gambling, running with troublemakers, never lifting a finger at home. Deming had borrowed 30 yuan and arranged a construction job in the county, and Shian had gotten himself fired after 3 months of carelessness. Meanwhile, Deming had worked himself into paralysis, and Yanfang had sold the family pig just to pay back the debt he had left behind. That night in the original timeline, Deming had decided he was nothing but a burden, and he had acted on that decision. The following spring, Yanfang had worked herself into the ground trying to hold everything together alone, and the ground had swallowed her too. But not this time. Shian grabbed his brother's hand and looked him dead in the eye. And what came out of his mouth was not comfort or apology. He told Deming straight, if he dared to die, Shian would walk out of this house and never look after his family, not a single day. That shut him up. The silence that followed was the first thing in 40 years that had felt like a real victory. Then Deming's little boy, Sichin, poked his head through the door and announced he was hungry. Yanfang broke a rough flour cake into 4 pieces and handed them to the 2 children, without ceremony. When the boy asked for meat, she scolded him, not out of cruelty, but out of the particular exhaustion of a woman who had nothing left to give, and had stopped pretending otherwise. Shian's heart ached watching it, and he asked about the pig the family had been raising. Deming told him Yanfang had sold most of it to pay the debt, and wolves had taken the rest. He wouldn't even spend money on medicine for his own body. Shian made up his mind in the span of a single breath. He told Yanfang to keep the fire going for Deming, grabbed a net and a heavy chopping knife, and headed for the mountain. She tried to stop him. It was 20 or 30 below zero outside. He walked out anyway. He knew that mountain like a second home, because in his first life, after the family was gone, he had spent years up there working as a forest ranger. He had learned to hunt, learn which herbs were valuable, learn how to survive in a wilderness that most villagers feared to enter. The northeast wild was rich with life, deer, wild boar, fish, pheasants, more than enough to feed a family that had been starving on flour cake. This time, he was going to use every piece of that knowledge. He would get meat every day, sell furs and herbs for cash, and cure his brother's illness. He had learned from doctors in his first life that Deming's paralysis came from malnutrition and overwork, not from any permanent damage. With proper food and rest, the man could recover. He owed this family everything. Now it was finally his turn to pay it back. He was barely out the gate when someone came knocking at the door behind him. Xiao Shuang, a man from the next street over, one of his old drinking buddies, the one the village called the Fool. In the original timeline, Shuang had shown up on this exact night and borrowed money Shian had handed over without thinking, leaving Yanfang to beg neighbors for food in the freezing cold. Not this time. Shuang came in all smiles and false warmth, throwing his arm around Shian like they were brothers, asking to borrow 10 yuan for some girl his mother had found him. Shian shoved him off. When Shuang reached into his pocket, Shian slapped his hand away and nearly kicked him into the ditch. Shuang yelled back a threat, promised to tell Shian's girlfriend Yuan about the fire job. Shian told him to go ahead, sooner the better, and kept walking. In his first life, that exact piece of gossip had ended the relationship overnight, and Shian had fallen apart so completely that Yanfang had worn herself to death. picking up the pieces. This time, he actually wanted to be done with Yuan, and the faster the better. He headed west toward the edge of the village, young body warm against the cold, and marveled at how good it felt to be alive in this form again. In his last moments before dying, he could barely move. Now he could run. He kept his eyes on the firewood piles along the road as he walked, because he knew something the other villagers did not. After heavy snowfall sealed the mountain trails, wild pheasants came down from the highlands looking for food, and spent the whole winter hiding inside those wood piles. He spotted fresh tracks near a pile on the west end, crouched down, and started whistling, mimicking pheasant calls the way he had learned during his years as a ranger. A small head poked out. The moment it spread its wings, he swung the net and caught it midair, and one clean cut with the knife and it was done. He was heading home with the bird when Shuang caught up, freezing and shivering, eyes fixed on the pheasant. He demanded half. Shian refused. Shuang threatened again. Same threat. Go tell Yuan everything. Shian played along and told him to hurry before dark. Wolves were out. Right on cue, a wolf howled somewhere nearby, and Shuang slipped, scrambled, and disappeared down the road in a blind panic. Shian laughed to himself and kept walking. On the way back, he spotted a wild rabbit cutting through the snow, and a thought clicked into place. Rabbit meat was good eating, and the fur could be sold or made into gloves for the children, because Yanfang was as skilled with the needle as any tailor in town. Back at the house, the water was already boiled, and the two children, Yinging and Siqing, had been glued to the window watching for him. Yanfang had already given up on the meat and told them to stop hoping. Then he walked through the door. He handed the pheasant to Yinging, told the kids to get inside where it was warm, and set to work plucking the feathers over a basin of hot water. He told the children to pick out the nicest feathers so he could make them shuttlecocks later. Push a few into a copper coin, wrap it with cloth, and the kids could kick them around the yard. They lit up immediately. He cleaned the bird carefully, kept the liver, heart, and gizzard, and let Yanfang take over the cooking. She suggested stewing it, so they could have hot soup on such a cold night. And that sounded exactly right. While the pot bubbled, he sat down and finished the 2 shuttlecocks. Hands rusty after 40+ years of not making them. But he got there by the time the food was ready. Yanfang fed Deming first, tearing the meat into small pieces, spooning broth into his mouth bowl after bowl. After a full serving of chicken soup, the pale color in Deming's face actually shifted, and his voice came back stronger. Yanfang wiped her tears when she saw it. It was the first sign of improvement since the paralysis had taken hold. There was not much meat on a 3-pound bird once he removed the bones and organs, and Shian made sure the 2 children got almost all of it. He gnawed on a neck bone, drank broth, and watched them devour the food and then lick their fingers when it was gone. That moment hit him harder than anything else had since coming back. In his first life, every payday he had bought meat skewers for himself, lent money to Shuang for drinking, bought gifts for Yuan, and never once thought about these 2 children, who swept floors and brought him food and asked for nothing. He had been garbage. After dinner, he pulled out 22 yuan, his last paycheck, and gave 20 to Yanfang. She tried to refuse, and he stuffed the bills into her pocket and told her they needed coal and the kids needed school. Money. His brother smiled and told her to take it. She cried. She had been holding this family together alone for months, and now, suddenly, without warning, Shian was acting like a real man for the first time in his life. She did not quite trust that it would last, but even a few days of relief meant something to a woman who had stopped expecting any. After everyone went to bed, Shian could not sleep. He kept seeing the children licking their fingers. So he got up, went to the shed, found rusty old wire, bent it into snare traps for rabbits, and slipped out the front gate to set them up in the dark. His brother heard the door and asked about it. Yanfang checked and saw he had gone, and assumed he had gone out drinking after all. That the good behavior had only lasted 1 meal. She told Deming she would wait up, worried about the wolves that had been spotted around the village lately. Neither of them knew he was crouched in the freezing dark setting wire traps for rabbits. When he came back, Yanfang told him about the wolves just to warn him, and asked nothing about where he had been. She had learned years ago that asking questions only made things worse. She locked the door, and in the dark of his room, Shin slapped himself hard across the face. If he had not been such a wreck in his first life, Deming would not be this sick. Yanfang would not have worked herself to death, and those 2 children would not have ended up orphans. He owed this family everything, and now he had a second chance. And he swore in the dark that he was going to make it right. He was up before sunrise. Yanfang was already outside sweeping snow when he told her he had set rabbit snares the night before, and needed to go check them. She smiled, but he could see in her face that she was not quite sure she believed him. Sitchin overheard from the outhouse and came running out, begging to come along, claiming rabbits were fast and he would need help catching them. Aangin heard too and wanted to join. He told them both to bundle up, and the three of them headed out into the snow. Yanfang stood in the doorway behind them, expression unreadable. Still not sure she was watching the right man. They checked the first spot, both snares empty, no tracks in the fresh snow. Sitchin squatted down with his lip pushed out. Aangin kicked him lightly and told Shian it was fine. They had already eaten meat yesterday. He rubbed her head and said there were more snares up ahead. 4 or 5 more spots, all empty. Sitchin started dragging his feet, and Shian took his hand and knew the boy was not tired. He was just disappointed and trying to hide it. Aangin pulled another empty snare from under a wood pile and started telling Shian it was okay, that there was a little meat saved for New Year's, when suddenly Sitchin shouted from up ahead, "Uncle, a rabbit! I see a rabbit!" A gray rabbit struggling in one of the wire snares beside a wood pile, standing out sharply against the white snow. Sitchin was drooling just looking at it, and Aangin tried to act calm, but her eyes betrayed her completely. Shian pulled the rabbit out, tossed it in the basket, and told them both that as long as he was around, they would have meat not just today, but every single day. Sitchin went wide-eyed, and when Shian nodded, the boy jumped so high his feet left the ground. By the time they collected all 13 snares, they had 5 rabbits, 2 dead and 3 still alive. 2 snares had broken because the wire was too old, otherwise they would have caught 7. They headed home with the basket between them. Back at the house, Shian sharpened a small knife on a bowl and got to work skinning the rabbits. First one taking 10 minutes, second one under 5, and after that he was flying. He cleaned them thoroughly, heart, liver, kidneys, all edible, all kept. He brought the meat inside for Demi to see, and his brother's eyes went wide at the full basin. Sitchin carried in the 5 rolled pelts. Demi touched the fur and smiled, then told the boy to get them off the warm bed before they spoiled. Shian asked for salt to rub into the skins so they would cure properly. He butchered 3 rabbits and buried the other 2 in the snow outside to keep for later. Yanfang stewed the meat with garlic and green onions, and while they waited, Shian went out back, found some thin poles, and built a drying rack in his room for the salted pelts. By the time the food was ready, everyone was starving from the work of the morning. But nobody complained because there was meat. They were sitting down to eat when Yanfang heard footsteps in the yard and went to check. Her voice came back from the courtyard with a name that made Shian put down his bowl. Yuan had arrived, standing at their gate in a fancy new floral coat and stylish pants. Her family had money since her father was the only one in the village who could drive the production team's tractor, and she had clearly dressed for an occasion. Yanfang pulled her inside, delighted, thinking this was a friendly visit. Demi immediately started pointing out the rabbit meat on the table, making sure Yuan knew Shian had caught it, doing everything he could to prop up his little brother in front of the girl. But Shian already knew exactly why she had come. Shuang had told her about the firing, just as he had in the first timeline, and she had come to end things. She sat down and started eyeing the rabbit meat, probably planning to eat first and deliver the speech after. Shian did not give her the chance. "You are here to break up with me, right? Let's not waste time." His brother and sister-in-law froze. Yuan stared at him. Every prepared line she had rehearsed suddenly useless. She recovered and launched into a lecture about bride prices, 200 yuan, a bicycle, a watch. All the things a proper groom was supposed to provide. Yanfang looked at the floor. Demi sighed. Shian laughed. He told her 200 was far too high for her, that Yuan was closer to accurate, and that he still would not marry her even if he had it. She stormed out cursing. Yanfang lost her appetite and tried to hand the 20 yuan back, telling him to go apologize and fix things. His brother said the same. Shian told them both to stop worrying. A woman who runs the moment things get hard is not someone worth marrying. He said if he ever married, he wanted someone like Yanfang, someone who actually takes care of her family. Yanfang's eyes turned red. He took the bowl from her hands and told her to sit down and eat while he fed his brother his soup. Demi had never seen him do that, not once in his entire life. He smiled and said his little brother had finally grown up. What none of them knew was that walking home right now, Yuan was convinced this was a scheme. In the original timeline, Shian had actually suggested a trick to her. Pretend to break up so the family would panic and scrape together the bride price. She would collect it and keep it whether she married him or not. Yuan was already humming to herself, planning to soak the rabbits. She expected him to bring her in salt water before frying them up. She would be waiting a long time. Shian had forgotten that scheme existed. It was more than 40 years behind him, and he had no intention of ever running it. After the meal, Sitchin had stuffed himself so full he could barely stand, waddling around the room in circles. hiccuping with every step like a small donkey at a grinding mill. The whole family laughed until their sides hurt. While they were still smiling, Shian grabbed the broom and swept the entire yard. Yanfang had only managed to clear a small path that morning, not because she was lazy, but because she had too much work for one person and had to save her energy where she could. She watched him through the window and smiled, and then went back to Deming's room to talk quietly. But Deming had still not given up on dying. Yanfang had talked herself hoarse trying to change his mind and could not. Only Xian's threat to leave had stopped him. She wiped her tears and kept sweeping, and Xian, when he came inside and saw her face, understood immediately what was needed. Talking to Deming directly was useless. The man was the most stubborn person alive. So Xian decided on a different plan entirely. Make the family's life so good that dying would seem ridiculous. Once they had food and money and warmth, he would like to see his brother try to argue he was still a burden. He told them he wanted to borrow a cart from the production team and go up the mountain for firewood. Deming shut him down immediately. The mountain was sealed. The trails were dangerous, and there were wolves. He said even when he could still walk, he would not have dared go in there alone. The wolf problem was real. In his first life as a ranger, Xian had killed plenty of them, but he had owned a hunting rifle then. Right now, all he had was a chopping knife. He could not be reckless about this. Then the door opened, and Yin's voice came from the front of the house. "Uncle Yin." Xian recognized the voice, and something clicked behind his eyes. Old Yin, the village's veteran hunter, came inside leaning on his crutch, bringing for eggs for the family as a small gift. He sat with Deming and they joked around like old friends, talking about fishing once the spring thaw came. Xian barely said hello, because his mind was already spinning on one thing. Old Yin had a hunting rifle, a Type 56 semi-automatic, accurate to 300 meters, enough stopping power to drop a wild boar in a single shot. There was no better hunting weapon in the whole country, and right now it was sitting unused in that man's house. Old Yin had been a great hunter until a tiger encounter years ago sent him off a ravine and broke his leg permanently. After that, he could not hunt anymore, but he still cleaned that rifle every single day. Nobody was allowed to touch it. Xian asked if he could borrow it, offered to split any wolf he killed 50-50. Old Yin shut him down cold, called him a child, told Deming to control his brother, and practically ran out the door. The faster Xian pushed, the faster Old Yin moved. But there was something nobody in the village knew yet except Xian, a piece of the future that still lived in his memory like a scar. In his first life, after he had moved to the mountain as a ranger, he had heard that Old Yin got sick. Zhao had taken the rifle and gone into the mountain alone to hunt, wanting to sell meat to pay for his medicine. She had never been in the forest before. The wolves had gotten her. The village head had sent a search party, and even they had barely found what was left. That rifle was sitting in a house doing nothing, and somewhere down the road, it was going to get Old Yin's daughter killed. To calm Deming down about the mountain trip, Xian invented a story about a co-worker from the construction crew, who lived on the other side of the mountain, and whose father was a hunter with a gun. His brother relaxed and said he could go, but he would need to borrow a horse cart from the production team leader. Deming suggested bringing the 2 extra rabbits as a gift for the team leader. Xian refused. Those rabbits were for the children. He stared out the window, frustrated, and eventually made his way to the outhouse, where he spotted an iron chisel leaning against the wall, the kind every Northeast household kept for breaking up the frozen pit in winter. He picked it up, and a memory surfaced. Old Yin had mentioned fishing with his brother, and that was when it hit Xian. The East River, fed by the San Yan, ran along the eastern side of the village, and in 1980 it was still clean and full of life. In his first life, he had swum there in summers and roasted fish on the bank and never once brought any home for the family. Decades later, the river had died, poisoned by upstream villages that turned the banks into garbage dumps. But right now, under that ice, fish were waiting. He grabbed the chisel, pickaxe, net, and bamboo basket and jogged to the river. Cutting the ice hole was simple, but brutal. 40 minutes of hammering until his undershirt was soaked through with sweat in the freezing air. He gathered dry grass and twigs, lit a small fire, and sat beside it to dry off before the cold could get into him. After 15 minutes, he crept back to the hole with his net. A dark shape drifted into view. He plunged the net in, swirled it, and heaved upward with everything he had, leaning back so hard he went flat on his backside. 5 crucian carp flopped on the ice, each about the size of his palm. And then something much larger came thrashing out of the net and flopped into the snow. Several feet away, a big carp over a foot long had launched itself free, and Xian laughed out loud when he grabbed it by the gills. He kept going. Within an hour, 13 crucian carp, 8 catfish, to big carp around 30 centimeters each, a grass carp, and a tangle of smaller ones too numerous to count had filled the basket. He got so absorbed that he forgot the temperature until a sneeze reminded him he was shivering. Undershirt still damp from the earlier sweating. He packed snow into the hole before leaving, having read somewhere in a future life that snow kept the opening from freezing solid, and figured he would find out if it worked next time. He hauled everything home. Yanfeng nearly panicked when she saw him stumbling and shaking from the cold, and then she saw the basket full of fish, and her eyes went wide. She rushed to stoke the fire and heat the leftover rabbit stew so he could warm his insides. He started cleaning the fish, scraping scales, gutting them, keeping the swim bladders and fat. His brother suggested sending the 2 biggest carp to the team leader as a gift to borrow the cart. Shian agreed immediately. Fish he could replace, but they needed that firewood before the dead of winter hit harder. That afternoon, all 4 of them went back to the river together, Shian with the pickaxe, Sijing carrying the net, Yanfeng wearing the basket on her back. The ice hole had not frozen solid. The snow trick had worked. 2 taps of the pickaxe and it was open again. They fished until sunset, taking turns at the hole and by the fire, the children running fish back and forth to the basket. When Shian tried to lift the basket to leave, he could not get it off the ground with one hand. The children laughed at him. Yingyin had been keeping quiet about how much they had caught. She wanted it to be a surprise, and she grinned and announced that during Yanfeng's turn alone, she had pulled in more than Shian had brought home that morning. They hauled everything back frozen stiff, and the kids dove onto the warm bed the second they were inside. That evening, Shian went to team leader Lu's house with the 2 morning carp, and Yanfeng tried to swap them out for bigger afternoon ones. He told her no. The big ones were for the family. She wanted him to bring more. He said it was enough. He was going to borrow a cart, not court the man. Lu's wife reached for the fish before her husband could finish refusing, scissors already in hand. Old Lu glared at her but could do nothing about it. He sat Shian down and worked out the cost, a day's winter labor with a mule. 1 yuan and 40 cents, full price. He offered to knock some off for the family situation, and Shian told him to charge the full amount. If he gave a discount, it would make things awkward when someone else came to borrow. Lu looked at him with something close to respect and said he had really grown up. He wrote the official slip and told Shian to drop the formal address and call him Big Brother, the way Deming did. On the way home, Shian stopped at the production team stable on the west side of the village, where an old man named Yang Lawu watched over the mules and donkeys. Old Yang had no wife, no children, nobody, the last of 6 brothers. Given this job by the team leader out of pity, Shian gave him a medium-sized white fish and the borrowing slip and asked him to feed the mule an extra meal in the morning so it would have strength for the mountain. Old Yang said he did not need the fish for that. It was his job, but he took it anyway. Shian was heading home when a familiar figure came running up the road. Shuang again, having spotted the fish basket and immediately angling for something. He tried to throw his arm around Shian's shoulder, and Shen shoved him off, and Shuang tumbled. He jumped up threatening, rolling his sleeves like he wanted to fight. Shian did not bother with the posturing. He grabbed the man's collar and punched him square in the eye. More cursing, another kick into the ditch, and then Shuang crossed a line and called Deming a name that had no business coming out of his mouth. Shian grabbed a thick stick from a wood pile and swung it at his head. Shuang threw his arms up just in time, the blow knocking him into the snow, and he lay there howling while old Yang came running out to pull Shian back. Shuang got brave with someone holding him and kept up the insults, and Shian hurled the stick and caught him in the calf. He face-planted in the snow and limped away screaming threats. Shuang went straight to Yuan's house. She had been sitting by her window all day waiting for Shian to show up with rabbits and an apology. When the door opened, and it was only Shuang with stories about Shian giving fish to other families, and nothing for her, her face fell. She kicked him out, could not have people seeing a single man at her house at night. Her parents came home from playing cards and her father expressed relief at the breakup, said the family could do better. Yuan demanded rabbit meat for dinner, and her father took her out with a net. And after half an hour in the freezing cold they came back with nothing. Back home, Shian did not mention the fight. He washed his hands and helped clean the rest of the fish, and after dinner told the family about Lu's offer of firewood and his insistence on paying full price. His brother smiled about that. That night, after the chores were done, Shian sat by the oil lamp with scraps of paper borrowed from Ying's school bag, and spent an hour sketching and measuring by lamplight. He had an idea for something that could help his brother, but he said nothing about it and tucked the drawings into his coat before dawn. His sister-in-law was already in the kitchen, heating fish soup so he would have something warm before heading out. He stood in the doorway and blinked back tears before she could see. In his first life, she had done this kind of thing every time, made soup when he came home drunk. cleaned up when he could not, never said a word of complaint. She had been more of a mother to him than a sister-in-law, and he had repaid her by being a burden that killed her. He drank 2 bowls of hot soup, grabbed the saw and knife, and headed to the stable before sunrise. Old Yang shoved the dogskin hat onto his head when he saw the thin cotton cap Shian was wearing, and tucked his brother's old gloves into his pocket alongside it. He hitched the mule to the cart and took the north road. He knew every path within dozens of miles from his years as a ranger, and where another man would have gotten lost in the deep snow. He picked the shortest trail and reached the base of Horsesaddle Mountain by sunrise. Back in the village, team leader Lu showed up with apples for the children. But the real reason he had come was to check whether Shian had actually gone to the mountain, or slipped off drinking with Shuang. His wife had planted doubts in his head all night. Deming and Yanfang defended Shian, told Lu about the pheasant, the rabbits, the fish, the work around the house. Then old Yang walked in with news. He had come to warn the family. Shian had beaten up Shuang the night before. All 3 of them stared at him. Old Yang explained what had happened. Shuang had insulted Deming to Shian's face, and Shian had lost it. Team leader Lu exploded when he heard that, wanted to go find Shuang right then, and Deming stopped him. Even now, sick and helpless, he would rather swallow an insult than cause problems for people who cared about him, and that scared Yanfang more than Shuang ever could. After Lu and old Yang left, Lu pulled Yanfang aside at the door and asked what was going on with Deming. She told him the truth. 2 days ago, if Shian had not threatened to leave, her husband would have killed himself. Lu stared at the window for a long time and could not find words. Then things got complicated in a different way. Lu's wife had been gossiping at the neighbor's gate, telling everyone that Shian had been fired and had spent good money borrowing a cart to haul firewood from a Snowden mountain. Within an hour, the whole village knew. Women were laughing about it, calling him a lost cause, saying Deming was a fool for taking him in. One even hinted that Yanfang must have other reasons for keeping a young man in the house. With her husband paralyzed, Lu caught his wife mid-gossip and told her if she kept running her mouth, she could go back to her mother's house for good. But the damage was done. A neighbor named Bujian came to the house and mocked Yanfang openly, said the money was wasted, that Shian would probably die up there, that they were fools for letting him go. Yanfang shut her down cold. She said the money was Shian's to spend however he chose, and even if he came back with nothing this time, she would support him in going back until he did. No hesitation, no second-guessing, just steady faith that he would come through. And she was going to be right. On the mountain, Shian moved along the north side of Horsesaddle, eyes on the snow, and found wolf tracks, long narrow prints about 10 centimeters across, fresh from the last day or 2. He gripped the chopping knife tighter and kept moving, picking open pots where nothing could hide. Moving fast. Wolves were smart. They followed from shadows and waited until you relaxed. He was not going to relax. After another 30 minutes, he reached the pine forest on the north side, tied the mule to a thick tree, and headed into the woods with the saw. He was not here for the giants. He needed medium-sized logs, and specifically windfall trees already knocked down by storms, no sawing required. Just haul them to the cart. He found a snow-covered bump, kicked it open, and sure enough, to fallen pines underneath. He carried them to the cart and found 3 or 4 more nearby. Once the easy pickings were gone, he started sawing standing trees, working close to the cart so he could keep an eye on the mule. Half an hour later, the cart was nearly full. He needed just 2 more pieces. He leaned into the base of a thick pine with the saw, and when he stood up to shift to the other side for the second cut, he stopped. 2 meters away, tucked under another pine, a big gray head with 2 stubby antlers was staring straight at him with enormous round eyes. A roe deer, the famous silly roe deer of the Northeast, standing right there like it had wandered out of a children's story. He threw the chopping knife at it, missed. The blade stuck in the snow right under its head, and the deer bolted east in a flash. But here was the thing about roe deer. They were called silly for a reason. He climbed a forked pine and waited. 15 minutes later, the same deer wandered back to the exact same spot, looking around like it was trying to figure out what had happened. He dropped from the tree, grabbed its neck, held on while it shrieked a horrible high-pitched sound, and cut its throat with 1 stroke. A good 30 or 40 pounds of meat, enough for half a month, and all of it from a deer that had walked back to the scene of its own near-death out of curiosity. But the blood was already pooling in the snow, and in these mountains, predators could smell it fast. He threw the deer onto the cart, ran back to the half-saw tree, cut through it as quickly as he could, loaded everything, and got the mule moving. The cart was heavy, and the mule could not run at full speed, so he jumped down and pulled alongside it, slapping its side and shouting that if it did not move faster, they were both dead. The mule found another gear, 3 minutes after they cleared the pine forest, a pack of over a dozen wolves arrived at the spot and started licking the deer's blood off the snow. Shian did not know that until later, and he was grateful for the not knowing. 40 minutes later they cleared the mountain and reached the wide ditch on the north side. He collapsed against the wheel, gasping. The mule's head dropped, both of them breathing hard. They rested 10 minutes and pushed onto the north road. On the way home, he stopped at a small village called Little Poplar Gulch and pulled out the sketches he had made the night before. He walked into the yard of the local carpenter named Zhang and unfolded his drawings. Plans for a special wheelchair, not the sit-up-only kind sold in county stores, but one with an adjustable backrest that could recline, letting Deming raise himself just enough to eat on his own or go outside for fresh air. Every measurement marked from memory. The carpenter had never seen anything like it, but the drawings were detailed enough that he took the job without hesitation. Shian left the logs as partial payment and headed home. Meanwhile, the family had been coming apart with worry. Yanfang had run to the north road 2 or 3 times looking for him, and the neighbor women were gloating at the fence. Deming was staring at the ceiling blaming himself for letting Shine go, and team leader Lu was about to round up men for a search party. Then Sicheng burst through the door, out of breath, pointing at the gate. "Uncle's back." Yanfang came running out with her coat flapping open, eyes wide, and stopped dead when she saw the full cart, thick pine logs stacked high, and a roe deer laid across the top. She walked up to it and whispered, as if saying it too loud might make it disappear. "Is all of this ours?" She asked if he had split some with his imaginary co-worker. He had almost forgotten about that lie. He told her they had their own 2 carts full. Team leader Lu came out, saw the load and the deer, nodded once without saying anything, and went home. The neighbors crowded around the gate. Bujian sneered that it was nothing special if someone else had killed the deer. Wang Bong rolled her eyes and agreed. Then little Sicheng stood up from behind the cart and fired back. "Well, my uncle brought it home. If you are so tough, go get your own." Yanfang scolded him for being rude, but she was smiling. The women shut up and scattered. Shian rubbed the kid's head. That nephew of his had guts. They unloaded the cart together. Big logs stacked behind the house for splitting later. Branches out front for burning right away. Then the neighbor Bujian knocked on the door, all smiles now, asking where the firewood had come from, offering to split any meat her husband caught with them 50-50. If Shian would share the root. She kept pushing, each offer more desperate than the last, even inventing distant family connections so convoluted that Shian nearly laughed out loud. He told her flat out he did not know the exact route, that he had been led there by someone else. Then he picked up a bucket of hot water and walked into the other room. Yanfang followed without even acknowledging Bujian, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen. She finally stormed out muttering. The roe deer was skinned and butchered in minutes, every joint separated with a knife, slicing through the gaps in the bones without hacking, like peeling off layers. Yanfang watched and said even the butchers at the state-run restaurant could not work that fast. Shian credited his imaginary friend's father again, silently grateful he had invented that man early, because he was going to need him for every new skill he showed. He set aside a hind leg for team leader Lu and told the family to stew the ribs for dinner. Then he said he wanted to borrow the cart again tomorrow. His sister-in-law said they had enough, and he told her there was no point saving trees just standing there. He was already thinking about the bigger picture. They had meat now, and after tomorrow they would have enough firewood. It was time to start making real money. The rabbit pelts and the deer skin needed to be sold in town, but the nearest places were far. And before any of that, his brother needed to feel secure about basic needs. A man as stubborn as Deming would never agree to spend money on a doctor if he was still worrying about fuel. That evening, Shian turned the corner toward Lu's house and stopped. Over a dozen people were filing out, and every single one of them had apparently come to borrow a cart to go haul firewood from the mountain. A group of men left grumbling about the rental price, most deciding to wait and see if anyone else managed to bring back wood first. From next door, he could hear Wang Bong beating her husband with a stick of firewood and screaming at him about how a man 12 years younger had brought home a roe deer while he could not put meat on the table. Shian walked in with a whole hind leg of venison. Lu tried to refuse and his wife grabbed it before he finished his sentence. Lu was furious at her, but there was nothing to do. Shian asked about borrowing the cart again tomorrow. Lu nearly dropped his teacup, then laughed and wrote the slip without hesitation, saying everyone who had come asking had balked at the price. The next morning, before the village was awake, Shian was already on the north road. He returned with another full cart of pine logs, this time choosing a safer eastern route to avoid yesterday's wolf tracks. The gossip mill had been running all morning. Half the village had predicted he would not make it back this time. He walked in past the crowd on the north road, and then reached into the branches on top of the cart. He pulled the dead wolf out by its legs and dropped it on the ground with a heavy thud. Everyone jumped back. The women next door screamed and ran into their yard. The wolf had a broken hind leg and a gashed eye from something that had already wounded it before Shiaan found it. Still, he had killed it barehanded with a chopping knife, and the wolf had killed a yellow sheep just before finding him. He dropped the sheep off the cart next to the wolf. "Greedy animal," he said. Its own greed had cost it everything. The men in the crowd stared at the mangled skull. Old Chin gave him a thumbs up. Bujian snapped that he was just lucky and slammed her door. The other gossiping women slunk away. But over 20 of the men slipped off toward Lu's house to borrow carts. Old Yang told him later. A flood of borrowers, practically fighting in the yard. Shiaan had no more need of the mountain. 2 loads was enough firewood. The storage crock in the shed was already packed to the ceiling with rabbits, fish, and deer meat. Front legs hanging from the ceiling beams because nothing else fit. Now he had a whole wolf and a sheep on top of that. He made a decision. Keep the best cuts and sell the rest. He skinned both animals, butchered the sheep with clean square cuts through the joints, set aside the sheep horns before anyone could see them, and carried a table outside to the yard. He set the wolf and sheep meat out with the scale and went to Lu's house to use the village loudspeaker. Lu grinned and practically jogged to the speaker room. His voice crackled across the whole village, announcing that the Fong family was selling mutton, wolf meat, and venison at 7 mao per jin. Come now. He repeated it 3 times. Shiaan was already running home. By the time he turned the corner, people were everywhere. Yanfang and the kids were already weighing and selling, overwhelmed. The crowd grabbing at the meat with their hands before they could even set up properly. Shiaan squeezed through and took over. Backed everyone up, lined them up one at a time. Lu came and yelled at the crowd to form a proper line, and after that it went smooth. Then Yuan's father stepped forward with a yellow-toothed grin, asking for a discount because of their close relationship. Shiaan shut it down in front of everyone, loud and clear. Yuan and I are done. He did not want his daughter marrying me anyway. So what relationship is he talking about exactly? The man turned red and left without buying a single thing. Bujian showed up late and tried to bargain the sheep loin down from 7 to 6 mao. Since they were neighbors, Shiaan told her 7, not a cent less. Then a big man in an army coat appeared, a Chong brother named Yusin. He was not interested in meat. He wanted to buy the pelts, offering 7 mao per jin for skins that were worth far more. Shiaan nearly laughed in his face and said the skins were not for sale at any price. Then Yusin asked about the sheep head. Shiaan agreed to sell it, but when he brought it out, Yusin saw the horns had already been sawed off and left without buying. Yanfang was confused. Later, when the last customer had gone and the meat had sold out completely, he explained it to the family. A single deer hide could sell for over 10 yuan. Yusin had tried to buy it by the jin at 7 mao. He would have gotten it for practically nothing and flipped it for a huge profit. The sheep horns were medicine. Scrape a bit, dissolve in hot water, and it cures fevers and colds in children. That was why he had wanted the head and why the horns were already off before the table was set up. In less than half an hour, 75 jin of meat had sold. When Shiaan counted it all out that night, after deducting giveaway scraps, accounting for every transaction, the total came to 50 yuan. His sister-in-law's eyes went huge. They had sold nearly 100 jin of pork from their own pig and made less than this. He gave 40 to Yanfang and kept 10 for himself, and told them he was going to the county town the next morning to sell the pelts. That night while everyone slept, he scraped the last fat off the skins so they would fetch a better price. The next morning before dawn, he stopped first at Dr. Shin's house. She was surprised to see him and unusually warm, which threw him off. He asked her to go give his brother a few shots of penicillin. Demian's back had been inflamed from lying in bed so long, and while the antibiotics would not cure the paralysis, they would stop things from getting worse. Shin sighed and said she had told Yanfang the same thing, but Demian refused every time. So Shiaan whispered her a trick. He told her exactly what to say to get past his brother's stubbornness. Tell him if he refuses the needles, Shiaan would split the household when he got back and Demian could take care of himself. She laughed and said only a real brother would know how to handle him like that. He tried to pay 3 yuan 9 mao for the medicine and her work, and she stuffed the extra back in his pocket and said family did not charge family. Sure enough, when she arrived at the house, Demian put up a fight, asked if the medicine could be returned, and then heard the message. He went silent. His wife pinned his arm down, and that was that. 2 hours of walking later, Shiaan reached Lin County, a modest place of 3- and 4-story buildings, small shops, horse carts, and bicycles. Not a single car in sight. He found the purchasing station on the west side of town and laid his pelts across the counter. 1 deer skin, 1 sheep skin, 1 wolf skin, 3 rabbit hides. The buyer was impressed immediately, especially by the wolf pelt with no bullet holes, only knife marks on the skull. He said he had worked here 8 years and never seen anyone kill a wolf with a blade. The damaged rabbit hide went for 1 yuan 50, the 2 good ones for 2 yuan total. The small deer skin for 12 yuan, the sheep skin for 16, the wolf pelt for 30. Total, 63 yuan and 5 mao. Combined with what remained from the meat sale after the medicine, he had just over 70 yuan in his pocket, more cash than this family had seen in a very long time. But he could not simply buy what he wanted. This was 1980 and grain required ration tickets, and they had none, which meant Yanfeng would have gone to borrow from neighbors before admitting it to him. He remembered a black market ticket seller from his first life, a man people called John the something or other, who operated out of a narrow alley behind the bookstore. He knocked on the black painted door, dropped the right name to get inside, and bought tickets for 10 jin of white flour, 10 of rice, and 10 of corn flour, plus a sugar ticket. 2 yuan 70 for the tickets alone. Then to the department store. Rice, white flour, corn flour, salt, sugar, soy sauce, soap, matches. Then the clothing section. A red padded coat for Yanfeng, 10 yuan. She had been wearing the same dirty one since he arrived. Rabbit pattern gloves for Yinging, 3 yuan, the trendy kind that other kids in town wore. Cotton gloves for Siching. New school bags for both children. 2 boxes of red tassel crayons for Yinging. 2 tins of good skin cream for Yanfeng's cracked and bleeding hands, the kind that worked better than most products he had seen in his future life. He still had enough left over to spot a large iron barrel in the corner, and a roll of plastic sheeting nearby. The storage crock at home was full, and meat could not keep sitting outside, with wolves prowling the village. Line the barrel with plastic, fill it with meat, keep it in the shed. That would work. He bought the iron bucket and 6 meters of plastic sheeting, and on the way out spotted a state-run restaurant and bought the pork and sauerkraut buns. 1 bite nearly made him stop walking. More meat than sauerkraut, fatty and juicy, and he inhaled both in seconds. Then went back and bought 10 more for the children. He also bought 41 fruit candies and tucked them in his coat. He loaded everything into the bucket, fashioned it into a makeshift sled with a rope over the snow, and started home. An hour and 10 minutes later he was back in the village, but something was wrong. People were standing at the west end staring toward the north road, rushing past him talking about cart reservations. Both carts were now booked to days in advance. He dropped the bucket in the yard without opening it and ran for Lu's house. He needed a cart the day after tomorrow to pick up the wheelchair from the carpenter in Little Poplar Gulch, and if he did not reserve one now it could be weeks. At Lu's gate, a crowd was packed around the front. Old Yang grabbed his arm and pulled him aside. The Chong brothers, Yusin, Yuming, and Yeching, had gone up the mountain that day. They had not found firewood, but they had found wolves, and Yuming had been mauled badly. Yeching had sprinted back for help, and the 3 of them had barely made it out. Xian felt something cold subtle in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. He pushed through the crowd into Lu's yard and asked about the cart. Every head turned. Lu tried to talk him out of it, and the neighbor women started in. Bujian and Wang Bong acting concerned but clearly hoping he would go and get himself killed. Xian pulled Lu aside and told him quietly he was not going up the mountain. He had ordered a wheelchair for his brother from the carpenter at Little Poplar Gulch. No deep forest, no wolf territory. Lu's face relaxed and he wrote the slip without another word. But something old Yang told him on the walk home settled in his gut like a stone. On the cart ride back from the mountain, the Chong brothers had been talking. Yukin said what they really needed was a gun, and Yusin had been trying for 6 months to get hold of old Yin's hunting rifle. His plan was to marry Yeching off to old Yin's daughter Zhao, not because he cared about the girl, but to get his hands on the weapon. Yeching said old Yin had already refused the matchmaker, and he barely knew the girl anyway. Yusan's answer had been ice cold. If she will not agree, find a chance to force yourself on her. Then see if the old man still says no. That night, Xian set up the iron barrel in the shed, lined it with plastic sheeting, packed it with meat, and said nothing about what he had heard. He went to his room and stared at the ceiling knowing exactly what was coming, and exactly how little time he had to stop it. His brother called him in to talk about finding a wife, and he cut the conversation off by spooning hot soup into Deming's mouth before he could finish his sentence. After dinner, he counted the money from the sale. Then the front door opened and his sister-in-law called out a name. Mingming. Young Mingming, the village doctor's daughter. Then a second name followed, and behind that name, half a dozen other young people from the village filed in, including Yuan hiding in the back of the group. He brought them all to his small room since Deming was in the main bedroom. Mingmin spotted the pelts on the drying rack and punched his shoulder, wanting the wolf-killing story. He brushed it off, said he just hit it with a knife, nothing special. She asked where exactly on the West Mountain he had found the firewood. He told her the same thing he told everyone. He did not know exactly. His friend had led him. Then she mentioned the carts were both booked, one by the Chong family, one by Yuan Yuan's father. Yuan Yuan had been hiding in the corner trying to stay invisible, having come along because she heard he had made several dozen yuan selling meat in one afternoon. Enough for 2 watches. She had come hoping to ease her way back into his good graces without ever admitting. That was why she was there. After they left, the family ate wolf hind leg and sheep liver for dinner. That night, Shian finally counted everything properly. 75 jin of meat sold, with the best cuts kept for the family. And the total with what he already had came to 50 yuan clean. He gave 40 to Yanfang and kept 10, and told them he was going to the county to sell the pelts. After he went to his room, his brother and sister-in-law whispered to each other, both quietly stunned by how completely Shian had changed. Deming wanted to spend none of the money on himself. When Yanfang suggested using some for injections, he shut it down. Every yuan, he said, was for Shian's future wedding. She did not push. She had learned not to. The day he went to the county for pelts, he also opened the second sack of things he had bought and laid everything out one by one. 30 jin of grain for a family almost out of food. 5 towels, 3 rags, good skin cream for Yanfang's cracked hands. 10 meat buns from the state restaurant. 41 fruit candies. New gloves for both children, hangings with little fabric rabbits on them, because she had never owned anything new that was not a hand-me-down. New school bags, to boxes of red tassel crayons for hanging. Who loved drawing and had been sketching everything in the house with a pencil since she was small. Then the red padded coat came out of the black bag. Yanfang froze when she saw it. She immediately refused. Too expensive. Return it. Shian stopped her. He told her the truth, all of it, what he had never said out loud in his first life. When he had come to this family at 10 years old, they were not rich, but she and Deming had raised him alongside their own children without one word of complaint. He had never helped. He had caused trouble and wasted their money and taken everything they gave. Any other woman would have kicked him out years ago. She never once said those words. In her eyes, he was not a brother-in-law. He was her child. And in his eyes, she was not just a sister-in-law. She was his mother. One coat was nothing compared to what she had given him. She wiped her tears and tried to laugh it off, but her hands shook when she held it up. She washed her hands before touching it, not wanting to get it dirty. When she tried it on in front of the mirror, it fit perfectly. And Inging told her she looked beautiful. Deming stared at her like he was seeing the woman he had married all over again. Then Inging quietly refused her own school bag and said Sichin could have both. Shian called her out. He told her that a girl who had scored perfectly on every exam her whole life does not suddenly score 0 by accident. She had been writing every answer wrong on purpose. Deliberately failing so the family would only have to pay for one child's school fees. Deming and Yanfang stared at their daughter. They had never questioned it. They had been too overwhelmed to think it through. Inging kept her head down. Shian did not push the guilt. Instead, he told her straight. The family had money now, food now, meat every day. He could afford to send both children through graduation. She would go back after the new year with her new bag and her new crayons. And she was never allowed to score 0 again. If she did, Sichin would eat all the meat while she watched. Sichin raised both hands in immediate agreement, and Inging smacked his arm and challenged him right back. She opened the bag and found the 2 boxes of red tassel crayons inside. Her eyes went wide, then filled. She had wanted a set like that since she saw her classmates using them, and had never dared ask. What Yanfang did not understand was how Shian had known about the drawing at all. The old Shian had never paid any attention to Inging. What she did not know was that in his first life, in the room where he had died alone, there had hung a painting called The Dream Home. Inging had painted it years after growing up and becoming successful, showing a warm little house with a family inside, Deming, Yanfang, Sichin, and herself. Shian was not in the painting. He was not in it because she had never needed to remember him. He was not going to let that be true this time. That evening, his brother called him in with the feather duster in hand, wanting to talk about Zhao, Old Yin's daughter, as a possible match. The front door opened before Deming could finish his first sentence. Yanfeng called out the name Zhao in a voice just loud enough for the bedroom to hear, and Deming clamped his mouth shut just in time. Zhao had come in looking worried. Her father had caught a cold 2 days ago, gone out without bundling up properly, gotten sweaty, caught a chill, and had been running a fever ever since. She wanted to buy some lamb to help him recover. had snuck out without telling him because he would have refused to let her spend money on meat. She stood there clutching a handful of small bills and asked if the family had any left from yesterday's sale. Deming and Yanfang both looked at Shin. He was already grinning like an idiot. The moment Zhao said her father was sick, his mind had gone straight to one thing: the hunting rifle. He had been trying to figure out how to get old Yin to lend it to him for days. Now the man was lying in bed with a fever. Yanfang elbowed him before Zhao could notice his expression. He snapped out of it, ran to the shed, and came back with the best cut they had: a whole rear leg of roe deer. Zhao's eyes went wide. She had only brought a yuan or two and could not afford that much. He told her to put her money away, that her father had helped their family plenty since Deming got sick, and this was the least they could do. She kept refusing. Yanfang took the leg from Shin and shoved it into Zhao's hands anyway. Still she would not take it, said if she had known they would refuse payment, she never would have come. And then Deming played his card. It's dark out, Shin. Walk her home and carry the meat for her. Shin agreed before his brother finished the sentence. Yanfang caught his instant agreement and nearly burst out laughing. She told him to bring the chopping knife in case of wolves, and Zhao protested she did not need an escort. Yanfang reminded her that wolves had been spotted in the village recently, and that shut her up fast. They walked with the proper distance between them, 1 meter apart, her in front and behind. People talked in small villages. He knew better than to give them anything to work with. She asked if hunting in the mountains was hard. He could tell what she was really thinking, and he told her the mountain was full of wolves and left it at that. She went quiet. Then, as they turned onto her street, a dark figure came sprinting from the crossroads straight at Zhao. She went white and stumbled backward, and he gripped the chopping knife and shouted. The figure saw him and bolted west into the darkness. Zhao was clutching the back of his coat, shaking, by the time whoever it was had disappeared. He told her it was not just wolves she had to worry about at night. There were men who prowled after dark too. The kind that would not be dealt with until the nationwide crackdown started a couple of years from now. He did not know yet that the figure had been Yuqing, the youngest Chong brother, stalking her all afternoon, waiting for her to leave the house alone. He had been doing exactly what Yusin had told him to do, and Shian had ruined it without even knowing who he was stopping. At old Yin's house, the old man was irritated that Zhao had snuck out to buy meat, tried to refuse the deer leg, and immediately understood the moment he saw Xian's face that a request was coming. You want the gun again? Xian did not deny it. Old Yin refused flat out, same as before. Said hunting had crippled him, and he did not want the same fate for Xian. But Xian noticed something this time. Old Yin was clutching the rifle on the bed, sleeping with it. That was not normal even for him. Then he put it together. On the walk over, Zhao had asked about hunting. She was thinking about going up the mountain herself to earn money for her father's medicine. Old Yin knew it too. That was why he would not let the gun out of arm's reach, because he was terrified she would take it the moment his back was turned. That was exactly how she had died in the original timeline. Xian changed his approach. He told Old Yin to think carefully. Right now it was just a cold. But what if someday it was something worse? Old Yin might be willing to lie down and accept it, but Zhao would not. She would grab that rifle and go into those mountains alone, a girl who had never hunted, who had never faced a wolf, who would not come back. Old Yin stared at him and could not answer. She impressed further. Lend me the gun. When I bring something back, your family gets a share. Meat and money both. Right now, that rifle was sitting useless. Old Yin could not hunt with a broken leg. He could not earn from it. He could not feed his daughter with it. All it did was sit in his hands while Zhao dreamed about doing the one thing that would get her killed. Old Yin sat there stroking the barrel, wrestling with himself for a long time. He tried one last excuse, said he could keep Zhao from taking it. Xian almost laughed. You told her not to buy meat tonight, and she still snuck out. You really think you can watch her every second? He had no answer for that. A long silence. Then Old Yin gritted his teeth and shoved the rifle toward him. Take it, but you had better bring me a share of whatever you kill. Otherwise, I am coming to your brother's house to collect. Xian grabbed it with both hands and nearly fell off the bed when he recognized what he was holding. A Type 56 semi-automatic rifle. The exact same weapon he had used for 20 years as a ranger in his first life. Accurate to 300 meters, enough stopping power to drop a wild boar in a single shot. And there was not a better hunting weapon in the whole country. Zhao brought out the gun oil and half a box of ammunition, 32 rounds total. Before he left, he asked Old Yin about a fishing net for the next day. And Old Yin told Zhao to dig one out and hand it over. She walked him to the gate, and in a quiet voice thanked him for what had happened on the road and asked him not to tell her. Father. He told her he had no reason to. He walked home with the rifle on his shoulder, a knife in one hand and a fishing net on the other, and started planning. That night he set the fishing net under the ice hole at the East River, tying 3 ropes to hang it at an angle so it would catch more fish. As they swam toward the oxygen-rich opening, back in the yard, he built a simple sled out of 5 branches and iron wire. 2 curved pieces as runners, 3 straight ones across the top. His sister-in-law said it looked like a flatboard, and he told her snow-covered roads made it practically effortless to pull. He was up at 3 in the morning. Yanfang and Ingin were already awake, the stove going, yesterday's buns and flatbread warming in the pot. The 3 of them went to the river together in the dark with the oil lamp, and pulled the net out at dawn. Fish started falling off the mesh the moment it hit the air. By the time they got the whole net into the basket, it was nearly overflowing. 50 or 60 jin of fish at minimum. He loaded the catch onto the sled, set aside 3 big carp for the family, and to bring as a thank you to Old Yin for the net, and headed north toward the county before sunrise. At the black market on Construction Road, he found a spot just as the old potato seller was packing up, bought his place with 2 white fish, set out the basket and the scale, and called 1 yuan per jin. A couple of women complained it was too expensive. He told them the state store sold frozen fish for 80 cents when you could find any at all, and his had been pulled out of the ice hours ago. A man behind them shoved forward and bought a big carp, paid, left satisfied. And after that the buyers came in waves. Then a young punk tried to stick his hand into the basket to pick his own fish, and Shian tapped his hand away with the scale rod. The punk screamed that he had been hit, tried to scare buyers away, and it backfired completely. The crowd he attracted took one look at the fresh unfrozen fish and started fighting to buy. He slunk away while Shian's best rush of customers moved in. 30 minutes, every fish gone. He was packing up when enforcement officers appeared at both ends of the street simultaneously, armbands on, walking toward the vendors. He spotted a side alley and pulled the sled straight into it. The punk who had caused trouble at his stall was the first one grabbed. Karma moved fast that morning. In the alley, he ran into John the ticket seller, who dropped to his knees with his arms over his head thinking he was being arrested. When he realized it was Shian, he laughed with relief. And Shian bought another 20 jin of grain tickets, then moved on. He bought more rice and flour at the department store, picked up 3 new fishing nets at the supply cooperative to replace Old Yin's damaged one, grabbed 5 towels, and 3 cleaning rags for the family, and on the way to the back door stopped and turned around. He walked to the clothing section and looked at a black padded coat hanging on the wall. 8 yuan. His brother had not bought himself new clothes in 4 or 5 years, patching the same coat over and over while spending every cent on the family. Tomorrow he was bringing home the wheelchair. Deming was finally going to sit up and see the sky for the first time since the paralysis had taken hold. He deserved to do it in something new. He paid and had it wrapped up. Back at home that afternoon, he unpacked everything, and his brother's face went hard the moment the black bag appeared. Deming said he did not go outside. What did he need new clothes for? Take it back. Stop wasting money. He turned his face to the wall. Shian had planned for exactly this reaction the entire walk home. He turned to Yanfang with a perfectly calm face and told her to help him hold the bag open so he could pack his things. He was splitting the household this afternoon. Deming glared, but Shian kept going, listing what he would take, his bedding, some firewood, explaining that the old family house had been sold so he would figure something out. Deming lasted about 40 seconds before cracking. Fine, stop with the splitting. Stay where you are. Shian grinned and shoved the coat at him. Then try it on. Yanfang burst out laughing. Before dawn the next morning, he was already on the north road with the number 65 mule from Old Yang's stable, the same one from his first trip, held back deliberately from other borrowers. He reached the pine forest, loaded half a cart of firewood, and then went to check for roe deer at the den he had found before. No luck. The tracks were days old. He headed toward Little Poplar Gulch. Halfway there, the mule stopped dead, shoved him backward with its head, and dragged the cart toward a side path, then stopped at the edge of a 6-meter ravine. Shian was about to curse at it when he glanced back at the trail they had been on. Under a yellow birch tree, a gray shape with yellow eyes was fixed on him, and then another shape emerged from behind a pine tree to his left, significantly larger than the first. A howl came from the right side of the forest. At least one more back there. 3 wolves, coordinating, classic pincer attack, and Shian had the Type 56 in his hands. The front wolf lunged. He ducked and rolled sideways, swung the rifle toward the one coming from his left, and pulled the trigger on instinct. A clean shot through the forehead. It dropped. Before he could track the next one, a 3rd wolf burst from the trees, a smaller female, which meant the one directing from the shadows was still out there. He dodged her, fired at the first wolf charging the mule, and dropped it with a clean headshot. The mother wolf turned to run. One shot. She fell. Then that same prickling on the back of his neck told him it was already too late. He spun, fell backward, jammed the rifle barrel up under the biggest wolf's jaw as it came down on him, and pulled the trigger. The wolf fell. All four were dead in the snow, and on the hillside 200 meters away, a scarred female turned and disappeared into the trees, and Shiaan lay in the cold catching his breath, knowing that every mistake from his first life had brought him to the second one, and that this time, he was not going to waste a single day of it.